Guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new entitled people content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is entitled Cop Gets Towed After Blocking Ambulance. As an EMT, I can tell you that I have seen a ton of things while I am working. Many of them being jerks that don't want to respect the fact an ambulance means there is an emergency, and they need to basically give us room. This goes for people who don't move to the side when we are driving down the road and people who get in our way while we are stopped and trying to do our job. The reason that this particular incident is being told to you all is because the jerk in this instance was an entitled police officer. I know that in certain countries it is basically not possible to tell an officer to do anything and they can get away with anything they want. In Russia though, an EMT can and will fight back against a cop if they are getting in the way of our job. On top of that, the law will side with us over them, especially because we are trying to save lives. I recommend that all EMTs put people in their place when appropriate. If your country thought has the thing where cops can do no wrong, then maybe don't try it there. There was a car accident involving about 5 different cars. Somebody was stopped at a light and another person rammed into them full speed, which made them go forward into other cars. We were sent to the scene because that first car that got hit, the passenger ended up hurt, and since she was also pregnant we wanted to get her and the baby checked out as soon as possible. Of course, a ton of police cars were around trying to deal with the fault of the crash and all that stuff. For us though, the only thing that mattered was get the woman into the ambulance and go to the hospital. While we were parked and getting the woman ready for transport, another police car parked right in front of the ambulance. We had no room to wiggle around and basically that car had to move in order for us to get to the hospital. The only thing was that the car was empty, and I had no idea which police officer belonged to that exact car. I tried to call out and see which car it belonged to until I found this one officer that it belonged to, and he looked at me with an angry look on his face before speaking. Entitled Officer, can't you see that I am dealing with an investigation here? Open your eyes and take a look around. Me. I understand that, but your car is in the way, and we can't get to the hospital, so if you could just move it for a second and let us get out. Entitled Officer, you don't tell me what to do. I will move my car when I am done here. You can either wait or go around me. This wasn't the first time I had to ask an officer to move his car, but it was the first time that after asking they had refused. Me. Sir, we have an injured and pregnant woman in the back. We can't wait until all of this is sorted to get here there. Entitled Officer, my job is more important than you trying to move the ambulance. If you bother me again, I might just have to arrest you for getting in the way of an investigation. I gave up talking to him at this point and instead tried to figure out another solution. The driver had no ability to maneuver the thing, so I was left with no choice but to call the number for the head of police. EMTs in my area have access to it for emergencies, and told him what was going on. He was angry and told me to sit tight for just a couple more minutes and he would take care of everything. The woman was stable and talking with the baby, seeming to have a good heartbeat, so we were okay waiting a few more minutes for the head of the police force to do something about that officer. I saw the flashing lights of another police car and it turned out to be the head of police who was escorting a tow truck to the crime scene. Everybody thought that it would be for the wrecked car, but instead the tow truck hooked up the entitled officer's car and put it up on his bed. The officer didn't even notice because he was busy chatting it up with somebody else and only noticed after the entire car was removed. He ran up and started yelling at the tow truck driver before seeing his boss. I heard his boss tell him off and saying that the towing for the police car was going to come out of his salary. We left pretty quickly and got the woman to the hospital without any major issues coming up. From the last I heard, she just had a little whiplash and some superficial injuries. Both her and the baby were going to end up being okay. I was lucky enough that I was able to find out the rest of the story of what happened back at the scene with the police officers. At least here in Russia, the EMTs and police tend to see each other enough that we end up having friends in the field. One of mine told me when we went out for drinks what happened after I left. It turns out the entitled officer still wanted to be right and explained to his boss that it was an emergency and that he had to park there. Then when the boss walked away, he started threatening the tow truck driver to be arrested if he didn't give back the police car right that second. He got heard and the head of police got even more angry at his behavior. One of the other EMTs that stayed on the scene told the boss how he threatened to arrest me for asking him to move his car in the first place. An entire investigation against this guy was started and everything he had done as a cop was now being looked over. It turns out that this guy had a history of threatening to arrest people that didn't agree with him or didn't want to do what he said. He thought that being a police officer meant that he should get special privileges and get to do anything he wanted. Some of these things he probably would have gotten away with if his entire career wasn't being combed through. It was more than enough for the entitled officer to get fired from his job. He was labeled as abusing his power instead of using it to keep the people of Russia safe from crime. I am glad nothing happened to that woman, but if anything had, he might have ended up being the person responsible for it. It also turns out that I was not the first EMT that he had pulled this stunt with. I was just the first to go over his head and do something about it. I had gotten many free drinks over the next couple of weeks from guys that just wanted to hear the story of how I got this entitled guy towed. Like I said before, it was not the first time that I had dealt with an entitled person getting in the way of my work. It was just the only time that it was a cop and ended up with him getting towed and losing his job. The next story is titled, Idiots in Car IRL. I'm sure many people had to endure idiots who love to cut off people on the road and then blame the person they cut off for damaging their expensive vehicle. The last time I had someone road rage my mom, I had a bad anxiety attack and couldn't go to work the following day. But these guys, I'd say, had it coming for them. Unless someone else sees it differently, then we're the asshat. I had just finished my 8-hour shift and had just wanted to go home and distress, but my mom had to go to our uncle's house to pick up some stuff for our grandma. He's her part-time PCA, and had texted our mom to come pick it up from his house. So we're on our way to their house and these guys in a smaller car are zigzagging on the road behind us and just repeatedly honking at us. They even came close enough to rear-end us. Which my mom has happened to her when she was pregnant with our youngest brother, before they pulled up right next to us and I turned to glare at them. The driver was a middle-aged man and the other two was maybe 2 college students from what I recall. They laughed at us before speeding in front of us and then processed to brake check us several times. My mom clearly not impressed by this and slows down to prevent from hitting them, but they just kept at it and by this point we were just a few blocks from the turnoff to my uncle's house. The idiots stopped at the light just before the turnoff and just sat there, even after the light had turned green, and I remember seeing the college guys looking back at us still laughing. I was about to flip them the bird cause one of them did flip us off and yelling again slurs out the window at us. So our mom honks her horn at them and then the driver, I guess startled but not paying attention to the traffic light, hits the gas before quickly taking the turn off, just as the light has switched to red and another car was already coming in their direction. Bam! Their bumper as well as left rear light got clipped by the other car, spin out a bit before coming to a stop after climbing the curb of the sidewalk, and the other car's front right headlight was busted. My mom and I were just sitting there shocked by what we're witnessing. Then I see some bystanders that were hanging out at the park nearby comes jogging over to check on the idiots whom were just as shocked as we were. Then I see a car pull up next to us and turn to check on the idiots. I didn't realize until my mom pointed out that it was the car that clipped the idiot's car. The bystanders helped the idiots out of their damaged car and onto the sidewalk. My mom didn't wait and just left to get to our uncle's house. Once she reached the next turn off, I remember as she was driving off to the next turn off, the idiot driver was giving my mom the "WTF you honk at me for B." My mom just repeatedly kept saying out loud, it was their fault for not paying attention to the road and kept messing with us. I had every right to honk at them, especially when the light was green and they just sat there blocking the road. We ended up staying at our uncle's house for a while to let things blow over a bit. I hope they learned their lesson over not messing with people on the road, especially one where it's in a neighborhood full of kids. Luckily there weren't any kids playing outside that day. But what do you guys think, were also to blame for leaving, or was it fully their fault and karma happened to strike right then? The next story is titled, Had a Bogey on My Tail in the Parking Lot. Deploy flares. This feels like a pretty good example of entitlement, but I apologize if not. Anyways, I have a local grocery store near me with a decent-sized lot. It doesn't usually end up full, but I guess yesterday was crazy for reasons I've yet to care finding out. There was no space and drivers looking for spots that had even less patience. I got in well enough to the store to do my minor amount of shopping, exiting with barely 2 bags full of snacks and sandwich makings. As I exited, a few of the hovering parking spot snipers were following people from the doors to cars. A guy in a large hatchback tagged me and slowly followed me. Usually, I would dip between cars to the next aisle over and they don't bother to follow because it gets a little creepy then. I don't like people willfully hovering behind me like that. Even less so when in vehicles. Nope, not this guy. Guns it around the aisle and back to me to follow my path. I jump across again, pretending I was an idiot who forgot where I parked. Guess what? Follows me again. This next time I'm far more blatant about shaking him off and double back. He promptly lowers his window and shouts at me, "Just find your ducking vehicle so we can both be happy." Doesn't even give me a chance to reply before rolling his window up again. I figure my bags aren't that heavy and the cold was enough so that my sandwich meat was fine if I took a bit. So I began wandering aimlessly, letting the guy think I'm finding my vehicle when I knew exactly where it was. He cursed at me a couple more times and seemed to think he was my designated replacement to a spot. I didn't time it, but I believe he hung on for 10 grueling minutes of my wandering before gunning it hard out of the lot, going straight through a four-way stop and garnering the ire of several drivers. No cops, unfortunately. The funny part, as I left, I could clearly see a few scattered spots he could have taken if he weren't so obstinate or driven by pure spite. The best part though, I walked to the store. The last story is titled, "One-Way Ticket Leads to Jail." I had to make parts run for the husband. The parts store is in a strip mall. This strip mall is U-shaped. There is a main road that runs one way from the entrance to the exit. The parking for the mall stores is one big parking lot. The parts store, the tire store, the oil change place all have their own parking lots separated and surrounded by a low wall. So as you're exiting, there is a 2-foot wall all along your passenger side except where the entrances, exits are for those 3 stores. Also, once you get to a certain point at the exit, there is the same type of wall to your driver's side. The exit is right turn only with a high curb to make sure you only try to turn right, along with a high median to prevent left turns and to prevent people coming in the exit. This leads as a short side road with a light where you can then turn left or right onto the main road safely. Just as I reached the point where there are walls on either side of me, I realized there is a Escalade heading straight towards me. I stopped immediately. Behind me is this big dually extended cab truck. I'm stuck. The woman in the Escalade lays on her horn and uses her hands to motion for me to move back. I threw my hands up in the air as if to say, where am I supposed to move to? We sat there for several minutes with her continuing to lay on her horn. I can see in my mirror the guy in the dually just shaking his head. Finally, she got out of her Escalade and marches herself up to my car. She immediately started screaming at me to get the hell out of her way. She has an appointment at the oil change place, she's running late and this is the easiest way to get there. I don't even know how she was able to get into the exit without running over a high curb, the high median, or coming down the wrong side of the road. I didn't even engage her. I just shook my head. The man in the dually got out and advised her he had called the police and she was 100% in the wrong, so maybe she should figure out how to get out of our way before they arrive. She then started screaming at him that if he would just move, she could. He said there's a line trying to get out, he can't go anywhere either, so she needs to back up and get out of the way. The police showed up, she immediately started screaming at them to make me move. I'm blocking her getting in and making her late for her appointment. He asked for her license and registration. He also asked her to please stay inside of her vehicle. Meanwhile, other officers have shown up and are directing traffic back through the lot to allow others to exit through the entrance and allow others to enter. Dually guy and I are asked for our ID to give witness statements, not that they're needed obviously, but it's mentioned she's getting a ticket for driving the wrong way on a one-way street. Usually this is a minor traffic violation with a fine unless there is an accident, but since she's made such a scene and caused such a backup, they have a level 2 violation. A few minutes later, the first officer asks the woman to step out of her vehicle. As soon as she does, he told her to put her hands behind her back. She is under arrest for driving while suspended. Having caught her name, looked her up, and she has a pretty long list of dumb-ass violations that lead to her suspension 5 years ago and several probation violations for driving while suspended. She is now looking at another probation violation, probably an added 10-year suspension and a habitual traffic offender. Thank you for listening.